Hey y'all, Big Tim here again. Thanks for tuning in for another episode of Old School and Bass. Today we're going to talk about something that I probably should have started out with, but to be honest with you, it was too cold for me to get out into the boat and get my rods and reels. What we're going to talk about today is introduction to rods and introduction to reels. We're going to get more advanced on each specific one in other episodes, but we're going to give you a basic. Remember, we're going to start people, younger people, retirees. We're going to give them a base to start from. So this may be a little introductory for a lot of you guys, but at the same time, everybody's got to start somewhere. So speaking of which, everybody's got to start somewhere. Most of us started with a Spincast reel. This is a really old school Spincast reel. This is basically an antique. So what a lot of people call Spincast reels are closed face, but these are the easiest reels for people to get started on. Most of us started with a Zebco 33 or even a Zebco 22, and those are going to be the easiest ones for people to use. If you're starting out kids, or if you're just starting fishing, you might want to think about one of these. Now, you're not going to find this bad boy because, like I said, it's an antique. But go to your local tackle store, look up a Zebco 33. And while you're doing so, I recommend getting the 33, what is it, the 33 Platinum, I think it's called, because it has all the metal gears in it. It'll last you a long, long time. I probably still have some of my old Zebcos that I had when I was a kid over at my mom and dad's house. This one was an antique from, I think it was my wife's uncle. But contrary to popular belief, a lot of people around this region say this is a Spincast reel. But it's not. This is a spinning reel, or some people call it an open face. This is just my little old cheapie for creek fishing or anything along those lines. You know, it's not the high dollar sensitive rod or anything, but these things will get the job done. This is the second easiest rod and reel to use. We're going to get into the use of them and when to use them later on, but we want to talk about right now the differences. This is a spinning reel or open face, not a spin cast. This is a spin cast. So anyway, about a spinning reel. One of the differences that you'll notice is the first guide is a lot bigger in diameter. That's because this line comes off in a helix pattern and it has to go through that guide. So when you're shopping for rod and reel, you want to make sure that you pair a spinning reel up with a spinning rod by looking at that. The other thing you'll notice is it doesn't have a trigger most of the time. There are a couple I've seen, but very few that have a trigger down here on the rod. This is an old reel that happens to have a trigger on the reel. We'll talk about that one later on. The next rod and reel that I want to talk about is a Baitcaster. You know, this is what I use the majority of the time. This happens to be a 13 Concept C. I've had them for about 4 years, 3-4 years. I love them to death. But this is a baitcast reel. These are usually the hardest ones for people to learn to use. Definitely to learn to master. They give you a benefit of casting heavier lures, whereas a spinning reel gives you the benefit of being able to cast lighter lures. That's what you want to do with spinning equipment. Lighter lures, heavier lures. You can be a little bit more proficient with your casting. I know some guys will argue with me. They use spinning gear all the time and they're real proficient. Myself, give me a baitcaster and I'm going to be more accurate with that than I am with a spinning reel. Even though I used to use spinning reel a lot in high school and college, I gotten away from it so much that when I use it now, it's so foreign to me that, you know, it's bad. I'll use one when I have to, but it's rare. You know, most of the time I tell people if they see a spinning reel on the deck of my boat, I've probably already given up. But they do have their time and place. You know, specifically if you're going to go up to the Great Lakes or anything like that where you're going to have to be finesse fishing, that's the way to go. But baitcasters. Thing about Baitcaster is, and this is one of my old school as far as rods go. See how short that handle is? This is my jerkbait topwater rod. I love a short handle. We'll get into that later too. But with a spin cast and bait casting rod, the first guide is normally smaller. Now we have other guides out there called micro guides and all kinds of different ones, but for most purposes, even the micro guides are going to be smaller. Micro guides are real nice. We'll talk about those when we talk about different rods. But right now we're just talking about the intro. This one happens to have braid on it. Like I said, braid is the hardest line to easiest to backlash on a baitcaster. But we talked about this is my topwater rod, still set up from the fall. We're going to put fluorocarbon on it here shortly to use it for jerk baits. But the other thing most of the time they'll have on a rod, you're going to have a trigger under the reel, so you have a place to hold. Okay, so that's pretty much it in a nutshell as far as the differences in rods and reels. Baitcasters, harder to use, but give you more accuracy, heavier lures. Now, I know that a lot of the guys up north are going to tell me, hey, I use spinning reel for everything, and that's fine and dandy. However you're fishing, as long as you're fishing. Spinning reels generally are used for lighter lures. Like if you wanted to get out and throw a rooster tail, you probably ought to throw a spinning reel or spin cast. Spin cast also gives you the benefit of being able to throw light lures. And some heavy stuff too. Particularly like we talked about that Zebco Platinum. Zebco 33 Platinum. One of the things we talk about with spin cast reels is the line gets tangled up inside. And one of the biggest tips I could tell you is when you're using a spin cast, if you can train yourself or your kids or whoever you're teaching to try to hold the line above where it goes in, it'll put tension on that line and it'll go in the spool a little tighter and it won't be loose. That'll keep you from getting tangled inside the reel. Another big tip for spinning gear is spinning gear gives you a lot of line twist. And a way to eliminate line twist is to open the bail by hand. Well, you always have to open the bail by hand, well, most of the time. And close the bail by hand before you start to reel. Now this, like I said, this is an old one. I've had this probably since I was in college. This thing is probably 35 years old. Maybe, well, 30 at least. But I used to use these triggers. The triggers are nice in the fact that you can make quicker casts. And it opens the spool for you. But the problem with it is that makes you want to wind the reel to close the bail. And by winding the reel to close the bail, I forgot who it was, but studies showed that 60% of your line twist can be eliminated by closing the bail by hand. So if you're winding it to close the bail, you're putting a lot more line twist in it than the guy that's shutting it. 60% more, they say. I don't know about that, but that's what I've read. I think it was one of the guys from Trilene. But that's one of the tips with that. So, hope you tune in. We're going to get more specific on spinning reels and baitcasters in another future episode. Pretty much told you all you need to know about spin cast. But like I said, if you're getting some kids started on fishing, go with the Zebco 33. You might even go with the 33 Micro, depending on how old they are. If they're real young kids, 4 and 5, go that route. All right. We'll see you next time, and thanks for tuning in.